Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right, let's have a lot of dead air beginning of the episode. Let's do that.
Well,
all right, guys, let's not talk.
Well,
for all of our viewers, they saw my amazing hand gestures of explosions of excitement in yet another podcast episode.
So much excitement.
So much excitement. And a happy Tuesday to Joe.
There it is. I was waiting for it.
I feel as if I should wait just a little longer so that more of our listeners who pop online after a bit get to experience,
Get to enjoy the Tuesday.
Think of the audio listeners. They're thinking, "What did I lose the connection? Is my Bluetooth headphones not working anymore?"
No, still here, still with us. We're still with you.
They're thinking about how many miles do I need to run? Or Seth says happy Tuesday.
Yeah. Well, if you are running, it is finally the hottest time of the year, getting right there. Gentlemen, it is just about July.
It's summer.
It is
That's
summer.
Sure.
And if I'm making, I believe our next podcast is on the 4th. Probably things we need to discuss about. Is it already the 4th?
Well, it's the 29th.
What? No,
the 29th. Today's Tuesday.
Oh, that's right. We have
the 29th and then the 4th.
Gentlemen, I've been quite the worker bee, so to speak. So
you've been busy.
Yeah, I'm like, is it Thursday? It's got to be Thursday at this point. So
my goodness, it's nice. In our area, we're getting a nice swath of storms to come through here. Let's bring the grass
quite dry
back
though.
Bring the grass back to green.
Yep.
Right before we start launching
scorched earth,
massive amounts of fireworks into the air.
True statement.
This is very good, actually. Yeah. All the grass, it looks like it is very yellow.
Yeah, bring it back in. Well, welcome to the Weather Channel.
Yeah,
in the Midwest.
Your Midwest Weather Channel.
Because that's what everyone was tuning in for.
What do we got? What do we have for announcements today? I know I have one I'm super excited about that I saw.
Well, let's kick it off first. Go ahead, Seth. Lead us in.
One of my DAX and modeling guys was I have to give thanks to for popping this one into my feed area, but it's the new DAX optimizer by SQL BI has been verbally launched via LinkedIn from Marco Russo just a mere day ago. Promises to solve all of our DAX woes. That's what I read in there. Just promises to solve them all. Maybe I'm over embellishing a little bit, but either way, any tool that comes out of SQL BI, I'm super excited about. And if we want to share the link out, Mike, you can sign up to get on a waiting list of a beta version of the DAX optimizer. So if everybody should know who SQL BI is and Marco and Alberto, but they have a DAX optimization course that they've been doing for many years, and everybody who's taken it, I hear nothing but rave reviews. So if they've taken their collective knowledge and put it in a tool for us to use, I'm extremely excited to see what that looks like.
Well, I think this is probably more like, in a sense, Bravo 2.0, because Bravo had some like formatting, I guess, but man, I imagine this is going to be a mix of the best practice, the BPA, with some things with Bravo, and just some good old new kind of features that we're probably used to, but just having it in the automated way. So I'm very excited to see what this looks like.
The more automation, the better, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if they're using AI in this thing.
That's what I was thinking.
So Seth and I were talking the other day, and we were like, with all this AI and One Lake and Fabric showing up, SQL BI has been oddly quiet about all of that stuff.
No,
they haven't really been talking about One Lake.
Oh,
they haven't really been talking about the new data engineering and the Fabric roles and stuff like that. So Seth and I were thinking, maybe they're noodling on something. Well, yeah. Now it comes out. Yeah, they were noodling on something. They were building the DAX optimizer application. And so I'm wondering. I haven't seen it yet. Don't know anything about it. I've also signed up for the preview, so not sure what it will do. other than every time you run it, it'll be like, your model sucks, build better tables, do more data engineering upstream.
Hey, here's a recommendation. We're going to make this measure change, and this one's called by this one, this one, this one. So here's the other change, the cascading changes you would need to make. Like,
The AI angle is actually not bad, because I know that Marco put in, like, he had an hour video of him using ChatGPT to create a DAX measure, or basically create his model, use all the DAX measures, and he was going through like, okay, let me try to change the question. So he's been very involved there. But I can also hear him though too, regardless of the AI, where he's like, yeah, Fabric doesn't change your need to know DAX at all.
Well, here's the thing I think is the most important on this tool. It's a phrase they used here. They said, not only will it identify problems, but it will rank them in priority. That is the most important thing, because people, one, can say, oh yeah, well, my measures aren't in folders. Okay, is that really a major impact to the model performance? Probably not, right? So maybe it's a best practice to do that, but we're not going to force you to do those kind of things. Let's focus on, hey, by the way, this measure is going to run really slow because there's a crazy filter context transition that's happening multiple times in this thing, or you're using summarize when you shouldn't be using a summarize. I think that's going to be more impactful, so that you could narrow your attention. Because if you're given, and again, this is probably what Marco sees all the time, he's given a model that has hundreds of tables, tens of tables, lots of tables with lots of measures all over the place, and you're like, it's slow. Where do you start? Where do you get the most improvement for your time spent on that model? And this makes total sense. They probably do this already. I hope it talks to you in real life, and it talks in Italian. At least has an Italian accent.
With an Italian accent. Your DAX is no good.
Is no good.
Is no good.
I need to take a break and get some pasta.
The pasta. What else we got?
So that was our one hit for today. There's another one that we had kind of out here. Tommy, this one came from you. You kind of found this one's roaming across the internet. It's a Twitter status message from Bernat. And Bernat's been very engaged with just this whole One Lake and Fabric thing. So Bernat, you're doing a great job of just really just diving in and asking lots of really relevant questions. Yeah, Tommy just put the question there. So Bernat is asking some questions around this one. Tommy, give us some context here. What's going on with this question from Twitter?
So Bernat and his questions have been a man after my own heart, actually, with the kind of the same idea. And the general gist here is, Bernat initially asked, is Fabric basically saying that it's a good idea to use your whole lakehouse as a data set for Power BI? Is that what I'm hearing? And as they're going on through the Twitter thread, a very pointed statement by Bernat was, wait, we need a custom lakehouse for each data set? And that's been the general feeling. If you think of direct import, or you think about how that works, you creating right now the data set in the Power BI service using a One Lake, or right. And if you try to select tables, well, automatically that becomes a SQL connection, which becomes import. So you lose that ability to use Power BI's now default way of connecting to data. So by this means, if you think about a even mid-sized organization, the amount of data sets that exist, do all these need now to be in their own lakehouse to work with Power BI or to work with the Fabric? Because if you take everything right now from a lakehouse, you take everything from that data set, or everything from those tables, all the tables, all those relationships, which still, mind you, can only be created in the service.
This lies, I think, the conundrum, right?
So is this the nuance of that question we talked about in the last episode, where it was like there was this generic understanding ahead of One Lake where all of these artifacts were just going to be available to us to connect to, but yet here we are connecting to 4 different types of data sources. So
and
you're saying
they
absolutely are still separated.
Well, at the end of the day, you need, if you're going to create a data set in Power BI, it's an entire lakehouse. That's not a subset of the lakehouse.
Yeah, but so my understanding is, again, maybe this is something I'm just not understanding quite yet. My understanding is, if you're doing direct lake, right, you go to the lakehouse and you click new Power BI data set, right? And then you just pick the tables that you want. You don't need to pick all the tables, right? To get direct lake tables.
When that creates like the where, I see what you're saying.
So sure. Like, go to the lake.
You have to recreate the measures over again.
Recreate what measures?
You're creating a data set in Power BI. when you create a new data set in Fabric, you have to recreate the relationships. You have to recreate the measures. And that's for every individual data set.
Yeah, but wouldn't the idea here be? I mean, you have to do that anyways when you make multiple data sets. There's no, I don't think there's a, like, I understand the challenge of that, but like there's no, are you saying you want the measures that come with the original lakehouse?
Yeah.
Like, here's the lakehouse, here's the measures, and then you just import portions of that and it just gives it to you?
If the general proportion of what you're trying to do is going to serve multiple data sets, there's probably very base measures that you're going to want, especially the relationships, especially the relationships and the metadata, the hierarchies. Those are all consistent if you're using those same tables. Why would you have to recreate those again if you're using the same fact, product, category table?
Yeah, but I don't think the lakehouse is intended to store relationships and measures at this point. That is a function of analysis services or SQL.
Right. We're bouncing back and forth between my concepts of stuff that something's not sticking here. The lakehouse as a connection is just a set of objects I can pull into a model and start to create relationships and measures on top of. Right?
Sure.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I have access to OneLake objects through the lakehouse connection, why would I not be able to just add another object into my model?
Well, I think that maybe we're doing the wrong question.
I think it's direct lake is what you're referring to. It's specifically a direct lake function.
Yes.
SQL import would act like normal.
SQL imports if you choose which tables you want to connect to from a lakehouse.
I think this is just
I think we're asking the wrong question. I think the question really is, how big is your lakehouse? Like, how many objects are actually stored in one lakehouse?
Okay. So,
and I think that's the question we need to start asking.
This is the point that I think is more relevant for Bernard's question here is, there's two things we're kind of talking about. We're talking about the lakehouse and we're talking about OneLake. OneLake is this all-inclusive thing.
Yes.
Lakehouse, or the object inside the workspace that is a lakehouse, might not need to be everything. That might be your, if you're using like the medallion type architecture, which everyone's seeming to talk about right now. There's a lot of videos coming out of that about the medallion architecture. You have this bronze, silver, and gold refinement of your data. At that final layer, the gold layer, maybe there's a handful of lakehouses that you're exposing the data through. And then Tommy and I were kind of talking yesterday around, well, how does this work? I could have shortcuts in my lakehouse that point to other things, but I still direct lake on top of those things. Right. I think so. More testing is needed from my perspective, but now we're adding like shortcuts to things. And so the data sits in one place, but doesn't actually get moved anywhere, which makes sense. I think from a effort and movement standpoint, read-only tables would be great. But I still don't think I agree, Tommy, with the whole, it is soon. I have to do some more testing because I haven't been able to get it to work. I haven't been able to play with it enough, but I have to think if you're going from the lakehouse into a Power BI data set, I don't think you have to take every single table to make it work with direct query. I haven't been able to disprove it though.
Well, not if you're going to from Fabric to, in a sense, a Power BI data set in the service.
Yes,
you are connecting to all the tables, unless you click a new data set, but then you're recreating everything from the ground up, which to me is redundant, because if I have the majority of the tables that already have relationships and they're already going to have those same relationships, well, why would I have to recreate that from the wheel? They're the similar tables. And I think that's why through our questions, I've been ruminating, if that's the correct word, or at least sitting on the bigger question on how big is your lakehouse? Like, how big should it be? How many tables and different data sets should it store? And maybe that's the question where we haven't really answered or haven't discovered so much. Does your lakehouse have 25 tables? Does it have only, does it have tables for how X amount of data sets?
I mean, I would say,
I don't know.
If I'm doing like a medallion architecture, right? I'm only exposing, so there's only a handful of tables that I want to really expose that are like cleaned, ready to go, that are ready and designed for people to start consuming from data sets, right? There's a cleaning effort here that's occurring. And actually this dovetails very well into our next conversation that's going to be around more of this anyways. But I would envision, like, if I had to divide these things and how I've been traditionally building these architectures, the one lake is everything. Everything goes there.
One lake is, yes.
Everything. One lake includes everything. When you start talking about the lakehouse or the object inside PowerBI.com, that is the lakehouse. That's the item that has, it's groomed down for a particular data set or topic of information, right? Hey, this is all the data that we need to give to marketing or whatever that looks like. And so again, with these shortcut elements, I could still create one table of data, but I could reference that in multiple data sets or potentially multiple lakehouses as shortcuts, right? So those are shortcutted items. That means there's only one official table of the information, and then everyone can reuse or relook at that same pointer to that location. What actually I think, honestly, would make a lot of sense. But to your point, Tommy, you do have this wasted effort of, well, if I'm going to use a fact table and a DIM product over and over again, well, there's some kind of relationship there that needs to be stored or captured and reused in all the data sets. I don't see that being any different than what we do today with a SQL server having tables, and we go look at them through views through Power BI Desktop. Every data set has to have a rebuild of that information. So I would argue, right, if you're talking about like enterprise level reporting, there should only be a handful of data sets that you need to service the broader part of the company, and you try and make them very generic and basic. You don't build a lot of complicated effort into those data sets.
The only thing and that's a good point, but you're still now dealing with, again, the best practices were still yet undiscovered of how many
That's true.
data sets per lake house, because right now one lake house we've already discovered is 4 different artifacts plus now a data set plus now a report. So what are you dealing with, 7 artifacts per report or per data set in Power BI? Because there's this 4 data flow artifacts that are created. There's the lake house, there's a warehouse, there's a data set, and there's a report. So one lake house, how many reports or how many data sets should that turn out for you? Because now think about the lineage. Even if they have the lineage view, you're still dealing with already something very complicated from one real true Power BI artifact or 2 Power BI artifacts, a data set and a report.
This is why I think Fabric has convoluted this whole space of how we design and build engineered data, right? I mean, aside from dev, test, and prod environments, OneLake or Fabric is now bringing all the enterprise grade tooling into Power BI. So before this moment, we would just easily draw a clean line and say, well, that's data engineering. That's out. Right. That's before I get it to Power BI. That's kind of somewhere else. And maybe you do a little bit of data engineering with data flows. But yeah, data flows works for, if you design your data flow well, it can handle 100 billion rows. But if it goes really large, billions of records, we're probably not using data flows, right? So it was a very kind of, to me, in my mind, it was a cleaner breakpoint between where does the data engineering occur upstream, and then where does it apply in Power BI? This just brings all the upstream data engineering into Power BI. So does that mean we have now one workspace for all the data engineering? And then that feeds a handful of other workspaces that are connecting to those sources of data or connecting to those tables? I don't know yet. I think you're right, Tommy. I think the patterns have not yet been established or best practices on what that would look like. Seth, you've been oddly quiet up there.
Well, I think the unique aspect of this for me is just trying to quickly dive into this aspect of like direct lake, right? And one of the things I'm pulling from the documentation is like the direct lake mode does not require the lakehouse endpoint. So because we're talking Synapse, right? So, but it does require you to set up lakehouse for some structure, I guess. So I'm not talking about like the complete modeling experience, I guess, of what Synapse, right? Like apparently this is to get you into a bucket where you can use the Delta Parquet formats from OneLake. So I haven't played directly with this, but if I'm going to introduce some additional thing into a model, it doesn't at first glance seem like I should have too many problems to still have my model in the Power BI experience. I'm just like connecting to different OneLake sources for additional information. Now we spawned off into as I connect all these things or create these objects, how many get created within one lake or my purview, which probably is part of the governance conversation that we wanted to have today. But like either way, I think maybe diving into, the direct lake and the use cases for it would be a good thing for a different episode. I think there's nuance in all this that like the actual testing out needs to happen.
I'm just going to push back against your one comment there, Tommy, around like one direct lake requires you to take all tables from the lake every single time. To me, in my mind, that feels like if Power BI forces you to do that, it's a miss, in my opinion. That'd be just a miss, right? I would not want to be able to, like the idea of the lakehouse is to pull everything in and selectively pick a couple tables that make sense for the data set beyond that. And I would like it to still use direct query or direct lake when it's using those elements. But maybe that's just something that's going to be coming out after preview, right? Maybe that's something that's going to be, landed later on. But I would argue that point. Like if it doesn't do that now, I need it to do that. That's a feature that's required, right? I want to be able to pull stuff from the lakehouse and not have to have the entire thing loaded into my Power BI data set for it to just be direct lake. Have you looked, Tommy, when you build a data set that's doing direct lakey things, do you have a different data connection? Does it show you something different there that's doing a direct lake?
Actually, the few times that I've tested it, and it could be the bugs early now, where it would create a default data set, which when I try to load that in using the direct import mode, blank. I had to create another data set. So yeah, you can select your tables in a lakehouse to create a new data set, but the default data set would bring in nothing. I had to create a new data set, but it would always say this is out of sync with the default data set. So it's all still very
seemed a bit finicky still at this point.
Yeah. I'm creating a data set. It's like you need to use the default data set if you're going to create this, but all that was blank.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our parking lot's getting pretty big. So
right. It's filled up with a bunch of trash.
We gotta build another story. Yeah.
All right. With that, let's move into our main topic for today. So I think today our main topic is going to be talking about this wildly popular article written by Matthew Roach. And Matthew kind of even calls out this is one of his fastest running articles, or one of his his introduction on Microsoft Fabric was kind of a record for him. And this is maybe going a bit deeper around, okay, what does Microsoft Fabric and OneLake look like for organizations? How does this start driving adoption? How do you think about this new framework that's now in place as you look at the lens of your organization and working inside lakehouse type architecture? So I'll throw the link here in the chat window as well. This is from Matthew Roach on SSBI Polar, his blog that he uses. He has very insightful stuff. A lot of his content is what is out on the adoption roadmap today currently. So I found an immense amount of value from listening to and thinking through the things that Matthew kind of produces. So here's the article. I'll put that in the chat window. Tommy, give us a kind of a stamp, an overview. Kind of let's maybe start at the very beginning. What's he kind of talking on here, and where does this start us off?
Yeah. So, and there's a few quotes in here that I'm hoping Seth can add, just because.
Oh, there we go. He's an announcer.
We have the quote king, but the idea here is now we're going to finally have that conversation, the good old conversation that we've talked about Power BI and data governance and adoption, and introduce this to Fabric. Matthew Roach does have some views in terms of how the current governance documentation for Power BI plays into Fabric. Making it as easy as possible for people to work with data is one of the tenets of the adoption roadmap. And that governance is not about saying no to people, but it's about enabling and empowering people. So part of the crux of this is, again, I think an initial opinion here is don't change anything that you currently have your tenets for data governance and adoption with Fabric now, just because there's new artifacts. And it's a lot of the crux of the conversation we're having.
I liked how Matthew's kind of initially started on, there's new technology showing up, but we need to sit back and really first define what is governance. Because I think when people think about governance, they have different opinions based on how they've worked on companies' data sets prior. And for some people, governance is just shut it off. Can't see it, can't touch it. For other organizations, governance has been more around working with and still enabling you to do your job, but do it with guardrails. And I think Matthew does a great job kind of at the beginning, very quickly calling out, he wanted to summarize what's in the governance. Let's talk about data culture or an organization. And I feel like this article is pushing us more towards, hey, organizations of the world, look, there's going to be more power given to the business users. There's going to be more ability for people to build things in a clicky, draggy, droppy kind of format, to steal some words from Christian Wade. But with this, it's going to emphasize, it's going to highlight more of the weaknesses in your data culture. If you have poor data culture, all this is going to do is highlight more of those challenges. What do you think? Does that sound like where he's kind of going with the beginning part of the article?
It is, and it's the same vein of what Power BI's data governance is. Again, the biggest thing that, and I tell clients too, governance is not about saying no. It's about being able to empower people the right way. And yeah, there are sure committee meetings, there are sure the conversations on roles and responsibilities, but the end goal of governance is not just turning it off for people. It is allowing people to actually utilize data the right way. Now, all that being said, doesn't mean it's a free-for-all Wild West, and we've talked about that ad nauseum. But here's one thing I will have, right off the bat, I will have to at least push back, or at least hold reservations, we'll say in a nicer way with the article. We are dealing with immediate pushback.
Fire away,
Tommy. It's just what stuck out. And this would be maybe a great conversation to have with Matthew as well. But we are introducing new technology, which introduces new process. It's very hard just to say, well, let it go, because that's the initial tenet, because we are dealing with a new platform which needs to come with its own questions first. And kind of going into this, how does this affect the people? How does it affect the current people using the technology in the process, to ultimately get what the solutions we're trying to get? How does it affect new people, rather than just the current people who have been dealing with it now? Do we introduce new people into this? There are a lot of things here where I still will push back a bit, where it's a OneDrive for data, which is one of the tenets that Fabric's been doing, because Fabric doesn't, or a OneDrive doesn't necessarily have for select people. Well, I guess it does, but like you can have the security around what document or what information you're sharing in OneDrive and SharePoint. There are still those roles there on who's allowed to edit our corporate PowerPoint. And if you're to use that same way, we're dealing with, I'm always going to be thinking and considering the fear of providing the wrong or the inaccurate data, and losing the trust. Okay,
two different things.
I'll back up.
You just jumped into data quality.
Yes,
that is not a governance conversation. So I guess one of your pushbacks.
Yeah,
one of your pushbacks, I want just ask a question about is OneDrive for data and security. How is the difference? What's the difference between Fabric or enabling that experience to a wider audience? What's the security concern?
So think about who created data set in the past, or at least think about the engineering side of it. I see you smiling. So go ahead.
I'm smiling at a comment.
Okay. Yes. Bless you, Seth. So, but think about the engineering side before, the medallion approach, or who's in charge of that, right? Of going through that. That's now anyone in a Fabric workspace can do.
Sure. But they could they're doing that today.
I was going to say, I would also argue, Tommy, depending on where the data comes from, right? If people are just saying, I need access to data, I see probably more often than not, people are just saying, well, let me just dump it out. And in many organizations, yes, you may be doing the whole medallion architecture, but once you get to that final layer of information that's coming out of IT, so typically Medallion is owned by a particular department. It comes out of IT because they're the ones that have access to the production servers that can get the data out of there. And that's usually, there's a gate that you don't want to have business users running queries against production. I mean, that's the whole kind of purpose here. That system is not designed for ad hoc queries. The goal is bring all that data down to some place and then let the business play with it and beat up this other analytical tool that is not running the day-to-day business. Because if we shut down the ability to make orders, everyone's going to be angry, right? We can't sell, we can't make money. So to that point, right? Yes, we have this medallion architecture, but you're taking a very IT focused approach on this one. And I think there's actually a very business facing approach as well. The business is already doing a lot of this stuff anyways. I've even seen organizations standing up their own SQL servers and their own data processes and everything inside a business unit that is not controlled by IT. So yes, you have this medallion architecture piece, but I don't think as many organizations are as organized in how clean that data should come out of that central system. And the business users are going right back to Excel because that's what they know. And they're building a whole bunch of other copy paste moves and other data system things. And yeah, they're doing the same thing that your enrichment of data is doing, but they're doing it all in the guise of the inside the business. It's inside Excel sheets.
Well, but there's a problem with that statement. Well, if they're going to go back to Excel, then we might as well open up the floodgates for them, since that's what they're going to do anyways. There's that
not necessarily data culture. So I think okay. there's a I mean, I would not agree with that statement. Just because we've done it that way in the past doesn't mean that's the way we should do it in the future. I'm just kind of making the argument here that is what we're bringing into Fabric now is 2 additional roles or personas, and potentially even a third persona that is there are now other people or other workflows that can be accomplished inside Power BI with the help of Fabric at this point, right? So that's my point really basically is we are now, there's had traditionally been 2 teams: the team that knew how to write a bunch of code, and the team that took that output of data tables and were able to manipulate it into insights, reports, and things that the business could look at every day and make decisions on, right? So to me, that felt like 2 teams because you need to have that user have that business domain knowledge. What we're doing now is we're now allowing the same ecosystem for all those data engineers and now even data scientists and potentially even production environments to start playing inside Power BI and Fabric.
And a good amount of that I agree with, where there's finally that enablement of just from the business side of it. I could think about, with data flows now we can do a lot more with Power Apps, and now we can enable just a marketing team. My goodness, what you could actually set up for them and then push to the other systems. One big thing that OneLake's been talking about is the ability for the APIs and be able to connect to a lakehouse via API. So you can really push this information out, which is a huge win. With that being said, I think I honestly think there's still a simplistic view that we're looking at this on. We're thinking of a few data sets. We're thinking of a few scenarios, not an entire department or a much larger department with a lot of data already created. Where how does that actually look in OneLake, or how does that look in a Fabric workspace? To where's the source of truth? If organization
what is the source of truth for a business unit right now without OneLake?
It probably comes from the data engineering team, and it probably does still come a bit from
what comes from the data engineering team.
The source of truth, the tables, the logic,
every table ever created for business units right now, that the reports that they're generating with Power BI all come from governed
absolutely
data
not
sources.
And I am not saying 100%.
Okay.
And this is I'm definitely not
That's
saying
what you just said.
I'll check the tape.
Okay,
but
so let me re-ask my question.
Sure.
What is the source for business units for the data that they're using in their reporting today? And no, not all of it's from governed places. So where else is it from?
It does come from APIs, and it does come from non-governed places at the same time. And I want to make this clear. That doesn't mean that that's always the right way, which is usually a lot of problems that companies have, is looking at a report going, is this correct? Should this be checked with finance? That's part of Power BI's, I don't want to say flaw, but that's part of the curse and the blessing of Power BI is anyone create a report.
Okay. Let me rephrase my question. Yes, Power BI is a very powerful tool for the business to connect to many different data sources of information, including Excel files, including many different things that they may store behind security in their own teams areas, whether that's OneDrive, SharePoint, like whatever. How do you govern that in today's world? What does data governance look like, even in a very well like an organization well down the path of adoption, what does governance look like in that world for that business unit today?
You're asking me these completely straightforward questions that you and I both know have a lot of entanglements to them. So I'll do the best I can.
I'm asking a simple question, right? You're making a lot of points about why Fabric and all these things are bad for data governance, or challenging the, I guess, positive vibe that Matthew has on Fabric solving some of these governance problems. But like, if we're bringing the negative, what does today look like from a governance standpoint for those objects?
In an ideal world, or are you just saying in
I'm
general?
just saying,
No.
I'm
In
saying
real
like
world.
in today,
Yeah.
in real
In the
world,
real
like,
world.
what does governance look like?
If you're going to have a governance program that actually was standing up, so to speak, there are levels of, call it certification, call it stamps of approvals, at least farther upstream. I think at the end of the day, regardless of the enablement, there's at least the stamp of approval.
Okay, governance is guidance and guardrails. Hey,
Sure.
business units, we would like you to do this with your data. This is where we,
This
how
is
you
where
should
you pull from.
How you pull from, how you access, like, and or store, or whatever the case may be. But it's not like they're all pulling from standardized data sets.
Sure.
They can connect to many different things, but they are creating artifacts that they're using within reporting, which you do have, like, technically rules around how they should manage. But as a governance body, how do you ensure that they manage that in today's world? Part of governance is understanding, are people actually doing what we want them to? Because there's a reason why we're spending all this time to figure out the patterns that we would like them to follow, because it's going to serve the company better, because it's not going to be random data. There's going to be some quality around it, right? People have access to the things that they need. Is why we develop the governance, but part of that is also making sure people are doing that. It's the simplification of, like, guiding people who, like, may or may not know about the particulars of data and reporting to the levels that we do, into the easy path. Here's how you navigate all this stuff. Here's the data access that you have. Here's the things we want you to do in your business unit. And many different business units do things slightly differently. But how do you know that they're doing it in today's world? Like, we've talked a lot about governance and adoption, and the challenges with specifically just Power BI are what? There's a lot of the data movement, ETL, where data lives, et cetera, that's well before the purview of Power BI. Right? Like, these are just adoption conversations.
This is part of the difference now in the world of Power BI, is the ability to create a data set that now lives in a place where the organization can consume and in a sense believe that's either true or not, where it's easier than ever to do that.
Great. So we've
the third era of analytics.
Certified data set way downstream, right? That's an object.
And how many times have we talked about that?
Sure.
About a certified data set. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's, to me, though, we've talked about ad nauseum the need for the certified and promoted data sets coming from the BI team, that's not just a random user doing. I understand what you're saying in terms of how is that different from Fabric. It is, because it's going farther upstream now, where at least the data set lived on this particular plateau or particular plane of where the data was getting created from, where the manipulation was coming from. But we still talked about that important need for, hey, if it's going to be certified, it has to be reviewed by the BI team. We've still talked about that.
Sure.
That's not IT. Sure. And the same conversations we had doesn't mean you can't create data, but how many times have, especially you and Mike, brought up, well, it has to be certified. We've talked about labels or putting a badge on it.
Sure. What does that process look like without in today's world, where a governance body would be like, hey, we would expect that, as this group is accelerating and they're a pretty heavy user of Power BI, but we haven't gotten any feedback around like their certified data sets. Like,
unfortunately,
are they doing things right?
I think it's rare.
What's rare?
I think the having this ideal world we've talked about with the certified data sets and doing
why is it rare?
Because it's hard to manage. It's hard. The resources put in, investing the resources investing the resources in the right people and the process for data governance. This is something where people
Say I
realize,
have my governance team. Say I have
okay,
my
yeah.
I have my central BI team, and part of those guys have their responsibility is governance.
Is the
Part of,
volume of data that's getting created? Is the
let's say
volume of
yes.
data and the
Let's say
people
yes.
who are creating it?
This business unit, heavy user of Power BI, but
Fine.
like we don't have any certified data sets that have come out of them.
Okay.
What do you do as a governance group? Like, are we just assuming that they're operating on bad data? Do I have to
Well,
engage with them manually, like to figure out like what data they're using, and how would I do that in today's world?
Seth, you're bringing up situations where we're talking about the lack of whatever the situation of the
What I'm
process
bringing,
you brought up
I,
is. And I know you already have an answer here. So
no, I guess my point is, if governance is about making sure people like follow a process that benefits the organization, there isn't a whole lot outside of discussions or building a process within an organization that people have to follow. But how do you administer that? How do you ensure that people are following your processes? Ensuring that as popularity of a report, goes up, all of those data sets start to become curated or certified or valued, like to the point where we're not going to have ambiguity anymore, right? Like there's a visibility problem is where all of this is driving at, right? In a current world, my building my processes and guardrails for individuals to do things or not do things is, yes, security related. Yes, it's making sure they have access to things. But the point here is governance should not only guide, but make sure that things are operating the way you would want them to. And for all intents and purposes, because a lot of raw data, a lot of transformation, a lot of back end things are invisible unless done in a certain way within Power BI data flows or like even data sets, whatever, it's still very missing. And like I find it interesting you're pushing back on really key points of potential improvements to this that Fabric is bringing forward, mainly around insight and oversight on an administrative level to understand whether or not your processes that you're creating as a governance team are being followed.
well, allow me to allow me allow me to, I don't want to say push back to what you said. You made some very good points that go into what I'm trying to say here. If you're going to follow, let's say, Roach's maximum, the farther upstream, there's a reason for that. It's not just optimization. It's about the accuracy and where you're pulling from.
Data quality, not
Data
governance.
quality. Data quality.
We're
Now,
not talking about data quality. We're talking about data governance.
you can't say they're not related at all.
They are two different things.
I think they stem from the same root, no?
Do they?
I would.
Directly from the documentation, think of governance as a set of established guidelines and formalized policies. All governance guidelines and policies should align with your organizational data culture and adoption objectives. Governance is enacted on a day-to-day basis by your system oversight administration activities. From a higher level, like non-Power BI related, as defined by the Data Governance Institute, data governance is a system of decision rights and accountabilities for information-related processes, executed according to agreed-upon models which describe who can take what actions with what information and when, under what circumstances, using what methods. It's very much what is going on in my ecosystem, and is it operating the way I would want to from a security and data access level perspective. Data quality, certainly really close, but not the same thing.
I never said the same thing. I just said there's a correlation. One affects the other.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. And I'm not saying, yeah.
Adoption, governance,
Yes.
quality, sure.
Sure.
There's also different roles. So I've been taking a lot of notes here on the side as you guys have been debating back and forth, I'll say. So as I feel a couple points here that are very relevant. So I think there's this conversation of governing data, and I think Seth, I think you're kind of hit the nail on the head on a lot of points there, right? It's around letting people play with information, but then being able to say, when people are building things, how do the decision makers of the output of that, how can they rely? And I think there was a comment in the chat that said it's about trust, right? Do you have a process that's documented? Do you have, are you using Power BI certified data sets? What is your process to get something that is certified? I think these are all actions that go along with the governance piece that help you trust what's going on with the data, right? There's rigor behind certain parts of this. I'd also argue in some cases here, not all data is equal and equal of value, right? So there's definitely going to be this, portions of data or tables or information you're going to make is going to be at the personal reporting level. Fine. It's less governed than it's less, combed over, right? As opposed to like that financial data, what has to be highly governed, and people get fired when financials are wrong. So I think there's also like layers of information here that you have to be able to make decisions on. And so if I'm an executive showing up to reports that my teams have made, the data is going to be messy. My organization may or may not have a good data culture around that information. I have to be able to, as a leader, come in and say, can I trust the information that's being presented in front of me? And I think that's a combination of, having good data stewardship, talking about what the quality of the data is, what is our process to get data from where it started from to where it gets to my eyes, and then being able to have confidence that I can trust the team under me that's developing that data and has done the rigor they need to get that data or information into a decision-making stance. So
I think to me, like, trust is data quality. Data governance kind of is the thing that raises the bar where you get better quality objects to interface with.
That's what you're saying governance is.
Yeah.
You feel governance is the side of the world where we're saying, so does governance is the guardrails essentially.
Yeah.
Play within this bound.
So for as much as I leaned into Tommy in the OneDrive and data security, because I think Fabric does bring a very interesting ecosystem to play that actually helps governance exponentially with discovery and how data is used, if Fabric is the platform that everybody is working on. Because as an administrator, like, even some of the simple things around the increase in administrative oversight of workspaces within an organization, right? No visibility, only accessible to API. Now it's part of the UI where you can dig in and see who the users and the owners and the administrators of all the workspaces are. And now, like, all this means is I have more knowledge to understand how the organization is using things and whether or not they're following the policies that I would outline. One of the key points that you breezed by, Tommy, that I think is a valid pushback. Granted, it's like, since this conversation is so heavy and large, when you're launching a new feature or something, it could take a long time to describe. But what's interesting to me, or I think is a miss from Matthew, is if so much of governance is about developing those guidance and guardrails and the processes in an ecosystem that we've just had this fictitious description of, like, how chaotic and crazy it is. If companies have gone through governance strategies and platforms that work heavily with Power BI, and it's all around how to navigate platforms and processes, you just introduced a complete rewrite of how you would want an organization to navigate Fabric. Like, this from their own documentation, strategy challenges, like having an understanding of how people navigate through things, people challenges, process challenges, skills and data literacy challenge. Like, you're starting over. You bring Fabric into the ecosystem, rewrite all of your governance. A little guidance might have been helpful to, like, figure out how workspaces and the explosion of objects and all these things that all of a sudden show up in an ecosystem for us are supposed to be explained, let alone the workspace paths and how teams are supposed to be working within here. Like, dude, there is a wealth of information that I would have loved to have had in this conversation as we just replatformed everything data related in Power BI, as opposed to just saying, hey, you know what? this should help out.
And you're
Plop.
getting to
Plop. Here's a bunch of new stuff.
You're getting to the heart of my argument. No one said you need Jurassic Park level clearance in order to use Fabric, in order to get onto the island. No one said that. But if we both agreed, and I'm sure Mike would agree with this too, the majority of organizations have a hard time governing Power BI, that Fabric is now something that we should have a word of caution with. To quote the great Steve Martin, excuse me.
No,
Okay?
I don't agree with that, because like from a governance perspective, you're saying like, yeah, it was hard enough with Power BI. The hard enough part is Power BI started a piece of this, which is the way far side. Like it drove for these conversations, and we were already having them with one piece of a puzzle. What my argument is okay, awesome. We just unblocked a whole lot of visibility. We unblocked or increased the potential problem of business units doing things, but not like from a governance standpoint, it's fantastic, because like all that data would come into an ecosystem that I could now have visibility over. That opens up huge possibilities for us to create better processes and guardrails for people.
But I think that's the problem. We don't have them yet. We have yet to create those processes. And to me, before you get to the Wild West, if it was so easy to do that with a data set and a report before data flows were even introduced, this concept of the Wild West was already apparent in the same UI.
Well, it's a fundamental challenge of business intelligence. Any platform.
Yes. But now we're introducing all these other concepts and services into the same mainframe, so to speak. No one's saying don't play with it. No one's saying don't have a ball, play around with it, try it out. However, there is yet to be a concise and solid grow up story with what we're going to do.
And I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree with you. And my pushback is I would have loved to. Some people have seen this tool a lot longer than we have. Right? Like it would have been great to like, this is absolutely part of it, because if like preview is a very short period of time, like this is a challenge that all of a sudden it's like, okay, how do we navigate this new space? And we're having conversations about this. So like,
and I think that's my point.
Don't claim victory with it. I will agree with this.
No,
don't claim victory with the tool for all of these things if without knowing, right, or at least giving some breadcrumbs along.
This is the crux of my argument today. No one's saying, you know what, only Fabric for IT. I'm saying, yeah, let the marketing team do it. However, let there be a process for the grow up story, for all these artifacts and components being created way before we get to the point where there's 100 pieces of information in a workspace, and that technology aspect of it will influence if people are going to use it, when it also becomes very confusing. How can we prevent that? How can we prevent the complications and the all of a sudden this hype and whatever that troth of disillusionment is? Because, well, I don't know what to look at anymore. There's 50 pieces of information. Who's doing that? And people will go back to Excel.
I do agree from the standpoint that if there are already, like, you look at the adoption roadmap, documentation, and governance, specifically around Power BI, the same challenges of like strategy, people, process, skills, and data literacy, those are magnified. I don't want to say it's like 10x or 5 or like whatever, but if you think about how off the rails something could go from a governance standpoint, is it easier or harder in Fabric to get your head around?
I would say it's easier.
It might be easier.
I
think the Wild West adoption strategy all of a sudden is like not so Wild West, because I'm an admin and I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing. We want to put here's how I want to guide you. Here's the objects I think you guys could use, and maybe it helps facilitate that conversation a little bit more.
I think if nothing else, you're going to get better conversations around, if you don't have solid processes today around what governance and looks like inside your organization, I think this was going to accelerate those conversations, and it's going to force people to really start thinking about, okay, now that we have this capability, and again, part of this is the one lake element here. There's a concept here that you can one lake it right to your computer, right? So I can literally have a file on my machine that I then drop into this one lake object that immediately pushes it out to the service, so that it can be available to me in any of my reports. Yeah. What I feel like is happening is there's been a lot of historical information where there's been such a hard division line between what IT does and what the business does. It was very easy, and the lines were very clearly drawn. Data governance, data quality, these are things that come out of the IT organization because that's what they were able to own. But now the technology is changing, and I feel like since things have gotten a lot less code-based, it's low-code or no-code solutions, because a lot of this lakehouse stuff, transforming things, we can now do a lot of things that we weren't able to before in just a UI. So I know all the code that was written before this appeared. There's a lot of headaches of getting things to talk to each other across different, Azure-based services. So now that this is all together, we're now able to have a holistically different conversation around, okay, what does this look like for our organization? What should we have for policies? And I think this is, one of my comments here I made earlier was, this is just going to accelerate the need to have that data center of excellence or that collaboration across multiple teams. Because again, an organization has many different goals. Each department has their own objectives. They want to see the data shown their way that makes their team look the best, right? There's so many competing, opportunities. Someone's got to sit down and say, what's the opportunity cost on these things? Where do we spend our money? Where's the best place to put our effort so that stuff adds value? And if you have, I would fully believe, or I'm going to be so naive, is we can't always assume every organization we're going to walk into is going to have that strong leader at the top understanding exactly how data should be handled. There may be just leaders at the top that just say, just figure it out, just get it done. And you have a looser governance policy at the top, which will then, that everything I read around data culture starts at the top. Whatever the leadership kind of, adheres to or messages to the organization is kind of how the rest of the organization will figure things out data-wise. This is just a more consolidated effort. And so I feel like Fabric has been very good. I feel like it has a lot of opportunity. I definitely feel there's a lot of rough edges now, but I think we have to focus on the technology has now leveled up. We now have to level up our people, and we have to level up our process to accommodate the additional features that come with the technology.
Like overall, my final thoughts are, I think ultimately this Fabric would certainly simplify aspects of like the business experience in obfuscating some of the things that are just innately happening, but also opening opportunities for them to leverage more enterprise platforms. I think Fabric does provide a super powerful platform that simplifies that oversight and produces which ultimately produces better results for the organization. Like if we build a bunch of governance processes, are people following them? Do we have that oversight within the organization? Yeah, man, like it definitely opens a lot of possibilities. And even from some of the administrative stuff I've seen so far, I'm super impressed. What I think it does initially, though, is it complicates the governance team's development of new processes and procedures because it's so wide open. Like
I agree with that.
Like it's bringing a whole new way in which organizations could or need to engage in this platform. And yeah, you're rewriting stuff. Like it's like, how do we do that? What are the best practices guidelines? How does it fit into the adoption of Fabric, right? And maybe those documents are being generated and we're just a little ahead of the curve here. But at the same time, like if we're trying to roll on to this, it's a key part of the conversation. And actually, one of these points that irritates me in the marketing of Fabric, like could lean into this one, man, right? Fabric. We've introduced all these things. There's now oversight administration. This helps you accelerate your adoption roadmap strategy within an organization. Like, there you go, marketing.
Yeah. That's the conversation it should be having right now, right? It should be this is, look at this new tool. Look how fast we can help you move forward. Here's some best practices and guidances around what data quality and governance should look like. Here's a whole bunch of things that are examples.
Because what is the differentiator, right? You're not first to market with the tech
no way
in here. Like you're coming to play ball, but at the same time, what does Fabric have that no other platform has? Well, it's unified all this.
Yeah.
So the more you lean into that, and the more you can sell around the fact that like organizations can accelerate certain aspects of this, might be helpful.
Yeah,
I should be more. Let's go. Maybe I missed my calling.
Maybe you did.
You're an author. No, and I think the last thing from a great conversation today. By the way, love sparring with you, Seth. So always,
I wasn't sparring.
Tommy
we
was.
get in an argument, Tommy.
I would love to see how you talk to your wife.
Maybe that's the problem.
No, well, just a good conversation that's needed, because there's a lot here that, again, it's all undiscovered. There is no fabric governance, probably because it hasn't happened yet. There's not a business that's actually rolled this out at all. We're still in a trial period. This is all very new. And how does the people affect the technology? How does the technology affect the people? We don't know this yet. We also don't know what that truth of just
we also don't know how much it's going to cost us.
We also don't know the cost of this. This is something I did not bring up, but I really wanted to today, because
to me, that's like my biggest question mark, right? I'm going to I love the idea of this thing. Right. I like that so many things work together. Yeah, there's a couple,
and you let everyone play, but that's a whole. I didn't even want to bring that up today, but yeah, that's a big point. But I think there's a lot here undiscovered that we're trying to figure out without actually seeing it in the reality, in the real world, on where would people fall apart with this? Where would people really, what type of people is this going to bring to the forefront? We don't know this yet. So
I'm gonna end on the Chat GPT and or Bing Chat conversation here. So we're gonna kind of land on this thing. So the question for today, I think, was very appropriately from the chat window, was talking about how do we define the difference between data quality and data governance? It sounds like we're doing a lot of banter back and forth between those two topics, and it sounds so. Here's what Chat GPT says: data quality is refers to the accuracy, reliability, completeness, and consistency of relevant data and relevancy of data. It's a measure of how well we meet requirements and expectations that is of its intended use. Data quality focuses on characteristics and properties of the data, ensuring that it's free from errors, does not have duplications, and any inconsistencies. Which I would agree with that definition. I think that's a very clear, we have rules, we will apply rules against data, then we can score it and say there's a score out of the data quality on that thing. That to me makes a lot of sense. However, I like the definition of data governance. Data governance, on the other hand, is a broader framework that encompasses the policies, the process, and the responsibilities of managing and controlling an organization's data assets. It's a guide of practices that ensure proper management, protection, and utilization of data throughout its lifecycle. Data governance aims to establish a framework for data-related decision-making, accountability, and compliance. It involves defining data ownership, and that's one of my things I had on my list. It was data stewardship, right? This is now something, if we're going to let data become discoverable from one lake, who owns it? You just can't just throw data into the organization and say, here you go, and not have anyone actually take ownership of it.
Yeah, but shortcuts are a great representation of who owns it. That data comes straight out of finance, right?
Yeah, exactly. Boom. But that's the point here. So the technology is kind of adapting here to help us. Okay, maybe we can actually have a policy around what that looks like.
Right.
The last thing it says here, it involves defining data ownership, establishing data standards and policies, and enforcing data access controls, ensuring regulatory and legal compliance. And that was kind of my point earlier, right? People get fired if you don't do something right. We're not going to let everyone see a bunch of email addresses in our data sets. So that's where those things need to come into play. So I thought Bing Chat did a really good job doing that one and kind of writing a summary around that. I also have one here from Google or Bing Chat as well. So that was Chat GPT. This one's Google Chat. It basically says about the same stuff.
Is that Bard or Baird?
No, it's Bing Chat. That's Google's version.
Google's version is Bing Chat?
No. Google's version is Baird.
That's what I just...
Bing Chat is whatever Bing Chat is.
Yes.
GPT something. And basically Bing was saying essentially the same stuff. It basically at the very end of the Bing Chat, it said some interesting things around data quality and data governance are both indispensable for organizations that want to become data driven. Both have separate practices, but they are fundamentally related. Often organizations purchase a data quality tool hoping it will solve their data accuracy and trust. However, they first need to address their data governance to create a foundation for enterprise scale data quality. To put it simply, you can't have data quality without good data governance. I thought that last sentence was ding, 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 spot on. Like that felt really relevant to me. And it was actually quoting a source there. The data source was Libra.com or something like that, was where I was finding that information. So I thought that was a really good answer on that information. Anyways, I think we've very much elaborated on this topic at this point. So I will say, if you literally enjoy us arguing and getting heated about these different topics around data, if you also enjoy us discussing and thinking these things through and trying to really push into these new tools like Fabric, we would love your listenership, and we'd love you to share this with somebody else. So if you don't mind, share this podcast with somebody else who may enjoy this conversation, who may be also thinking through what's the difference between data quality and data governance, and how does this now interact with your Fabric environment? Where is this going to fit? I think there's a lot of unknowns at this point. We're going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to think through these situations and figure out, okay, what is our data governance? What will this look like? And how will it impact our company? Excellent. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Man, you can find the podcast anywhere it's available. Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast. Make sure to subscribe, leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Join the conversation live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central on all Power BI.tips channels. If you like these Fabric conversations and Power BI in general, make sure to submit a mailbag on what do you want us to argue, talk about, have a discussion on at the powerbi.tips/podcast webpage.
Excellent. Yeah, that works. Oh, that's fine.
Sure.
It's good. It's good enough.
Still a webpage.
It's good enough.
Sounds like I'm 55, but it's a webpage.
On the interwebs.
On the interwebs, yes.
Thank you all very much, and we'll catch you next time.